Hello everybody, welcome back to some more lecture notes in ecology. This might be our last lecture in ecology. Might have one more, definitely not two, but here we go. This one won't take too long. Alright, so we're going to go over today ecological change. Basically, changes that take place within ecosystems. So, here we go. Alright, so these are some images from the island out in the middle of the Pacific called Hawaii. Right now, raise your hand if you've been to Hawaii. Raise your hand. I've been to Hawaii twice. Anyways, Hawaii came out from the middle of the ocean. It just emerged from under the water because it's a volcano. So out of the ocean came bare rock. So this lava here turned in, cooled and hardened into rock. Well, after hundreds and even thousands of years, this barren landscape turned into this luscious plants all over the place, insects, animals, birds, everything. Well, how did it go from coming out of the ocean as a volcanic island with absolutely nothing living on it, just rock, and after a few hundred or a few thousand years, it turns into that beautiful paradise? Well, we're going to see how that happens. Now, first of all, a few million years ago when the Hawaiian Islands popped out from underneath the ocean, it used to just be ocean, and all of a sudden, boom, a volcano just emerges out of nowhere. I know this is not the greatest graphics you've ever seen, but that's the best I can do with pictures. But my question is, when the volcanic island first emerges and all there is barren rock, what do you think the first type of organisms that would inhabit that island? What are the first things that would show up there? Do you think it would be something like this naked guy? What do you think? Well, the thing is, if the first organism on this volcanic island, that's all it is rock, was something like this guy, what's he going to eat? Do people eat rocks? Now you might say, yeah, this guy right here, he's eating rocks, so maybe it was a person that was the first to inhabit Hawaii millions of years ago when it was just a big, gigantic, volcanic rock out in the middle of the Pacific. But this guy right here, even if he does, chew off a little piece of that rock and grind it up and swallow it, he's not going to get any nutrition from a rock. So obviously, the first type of organism to inhabit Hawaii was not a complex heterotroph. Remember, heterotrophs need to eat. It was not a heterotroph like a person, or even like a bird, or a squirrel, or something like that. It couldn't be, because they cannot eat rocks. So the question is, what type of organisms would be the first to inhabit or colonize a brand new area that nothing has ever lived there before? And building upon that, that's where we get to the term ecological succession. Very important. That is the changes in the species or the types of organisms that make up a community in an ecosystem over time. So in a community, through ecological succession, things change. The ecosystem does not stay the same forever. Things change. And the first type of succession that we're going to talk about is called primary succession. And this is exactly like how the Hawaiian Islands emerged from underneath the Pacific Ocean a few million years ago, and nothing lived there, but now we know a lot of things live there. There's a lot of trees. There's millions and millions of different trees there. Insects, birds, and even people now live there. So primary succession is changes in the species of organisms over time in an area that has never, I'm going to underline that 50 times, never been inhabited before. So this is like brand new land. Nothing has ever lived there. But organisms will move into that area and inhabit it. They will make that place home. Now, the first organisms that inhabit this brand new land are never things like people or bears or lions or any of those heterotrophs, things that need to eat. They're always autotrophs, things that can make their own food, because if you're living on a rock, you got to be able to make your own food unless you can eat rocks, but nothing really can eat rocks. So those are things like moss, the stuff that grows on trees. This other stuff called lichen, which is kind of like moss. Now there's two reasons why things like moss and lichen are the first things that inhabit a brand new piece of land. Well, first, they're autotrophs. They can make their own food, so they don't have to eat the rocks. And number two, they're able to survive in an area that has poor soil development. Soil is not just dirt. Remember, for like plants to live, they need nutrients in the soil. Like fertilizer, they need nitrogen, they need phosphorus. But things like moss and lichen do not. They can grow straight on bare rock. They do not need soil. So for other things like trees and bushes and shrubs to come, first you have to make or develop the soil. You need organic materials to get into the dirt to form soil. All right, so here's a little photograph that kind of shows you what primary succession is. So you have this barren landscape. I think this is Hawaii. I found this picture several years ago. And hey, nothing lives there, nothing lives there. And then all of a sudden, like some little seed came through the air, floated through the air, and boop. And all of a sudden, hey, we got a plant. Remember, it's always an autotroph that is the first to colonize or inhabit a new area. Now, this specific type of plant, it can't need good soil because this guy is basically growing out of bare rock. There's not many nutrients inside of this soil because nothing has ever lived there before. Nothing ever lived there before and died and got decomposed to put those nutrients into the soil. So, this would be an example of primary succession. All right, so moving on with primary succession. Here's a term, pioneer species. If you saw the previous slide of just nothing that you can see, all you could see was rock except that one plant. Well, the first organisms to colonize or inhabit a new area, those are the pioneer species. They're the first ones to show up. So this is an area that nothing has ever lived there before. Now remember, these have to be autotrophs. The first things that show up have to be autotrophs because there's nothing there to eat. So they have to be things that can make their own food, like really simple plants. They also have to not need soil in order to grow. Now remember, there is a difference between just dirt and soil. Soil has organic compounds in it like nitrogen and phosphorus. Now that gets put in there when things die. If something gets decomposed, their nutrients go into the ground to form soil. Also, when animals drop their feces or their droppings on the ground, what you would call poo, that is also what helps soil because that's kind of like fertilizer. Now, a common pioneer species is called lichen. It's a combination of a fungus, kind of like a mushroom, and algae. It's a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. You won't need to know it. But these are things, autotrophs, that can grow right on rocks. They do not need soil. If you try to, make a garden at home, and instead of putting them in soil with a lot of nutrients in it, if you try to grow it on rock, they wouldn't grow. But things like lichen can. And that's what a pioneer species is. The first thing to colonize an area. All right, now the second type of succession. Now don't freak out because it's very similar to the first type, primary succession. The other one's called secondary succession. And that is very similar. Pretty much the only difference is this is the changes in the type of species or organisms which live in an area or an ecosystem over time. But this time, there were things living there. There was a community of organisms living there, but something happened. It might have been a fire or a flood or some other type of disaster that wiped out all the life in that area. And since the life got wiped out, now it needs to start over again. Now it's a little faster than primary succession because since things live there, soil is available. There were things living there, so there are nutrients in the ground, which makes it soil. So now you don't need things like lichen to show up. I mean, it could be, but now you could have shrubs or small trees that can move in to inhabit the new area. Now another little thing. Remember, we start out with what's called pioneer species. Those are the first things to inhabit a new area, but they're not going to be there forever. Things change. Eventually the organisms get more and more complex. So you get larger and larger types of plants, more complex type of like large trees. You also get animals to move in, and eventually you reach a stage that becomes pretty stable. It lasts for a long, long time, hundreds, thousands of years. And once you reach that, that's called a climax community. It's almost thought of like an end stage of succession. So you start out simple with little things like lichen, which is like moss, and then eventually you can have a big forest with very large trees and deer and lions and bears and everything else. That would be called the climax community. All right, so here's a little diagram or picture that shows you secondary succession. So you have a climax community. You can see these big, tall trees growing there, a lot of animals. Oh, we had some sort of disturbance. In this case, it looked like a fire. Totally wiped out the area. Whoa, nothing living there anymore. All right, but things are eventually going to re-inhabit the area. It's not going to be barren land forever. Then it's going to start with the grasses again, and then some shrubs will move in, and then, hey, maybe you'll have small trees, and then eventually it'll return back into that climax community again. So this is basically what you need to know about secondary succession. You have things living there, but there's some sort of disturbance that wipes out all the life, and then life has to start over again. And around we go. So even though this climax community, it may be there for hundreds or thousands of years, but something could wipe it out. If a volcano erupts and just knocks down all the trees and kills all the animals, well, that community is going to have to start over again. And that's what's called secondary succession. And your last slide. So here's what succession looks like in a picture. So this is time passing. So at the beginning, a new area, you have, some very simple plants that live there, and then they become a little bit more complex with the perennial plants and some grasses. And a little bit later, okay, you'll have some little bit larger, more complex shrubs and plants. And a little bit later, maybe you'll have some more complex, some softwood trees and pines. And eventually, you can get to this climax community, which basically nothing will overcome them unless there's some sort of disturbance that happens to wipe them all out. So that's what succession is. It's how things change over time. The communities, the ecosystems, are not permanent. They're always changing. All right, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least didn't hate it, and I'll talk to you next time.